I'm going to show you two cricketers here. One was a very decent player, he scored a lot of runs, but at a fairly ordinary strike rate. But he had incredible consistency. The other is much better. Not only is he one of the highest scorers in the competition, but he's doing so at a very good rate. There is no doubt that these are very different batters. The weirder thing here is that I have cheated, of course, and that these are the exact same player. The first player is Shikhar Dhawan's first 10 years in the IPL. The second is Shikhar Dhawan's last 4 seasons. This is a big jump. This is not what players usually do late in their careers. Dhawan has managed in the last 4 seasons to up his average by 8, while also getting a strike rate of 17 higher. If you changed one, that would make sense. To change both so dramatically for a long period is, well, a bit weird. For the longest time, he existed as an IPL player, but perhaps without making that big of an impact. And yet he is the second highest scorer in IPL history. This isn't a casual player or a replacement level talent. He's been a first choice IPL batter since 2010. Even in 2008, in his first season, he was incredible. The only year he really ever struggled was 2009. And Dhawan has been around for a long time. He's outlasted cheerleaders, Lalit Modi and the Deccan Chargers. But there isn't much in his early record that suggests he was an outstanding player. An average of 32 is really good, but not when paired with a strike rate of 121. I suppose it's enough to get him paid, and it kept him around, but never quite be the star. I think the fact that he scored the second most runs in IPL tells you he was an above average talent, and you can sort of set your watch by him. In a decade, he's only twice popped under an average of 30. As far as strike rates go, once he was a settled player, he was a little bit quicker than the league average, but then for a long time, 6 years, he was beneath that mark. And there is a disconnect here. How can someone who is good enough to score this consistently and be the second highest run scorer ever barely reach league average when it comes to strike rate? Think about Dhawan's batting for a minute. He's getting himself in, so it means he's set a lot of the time. He's batting in the power play, which is really good. And he's still scoring slower than players who have nowhere near his level of talent, who often come in when the ball is softer and the field is out. Now I want to show you something else. This is his auction price by year. It's not his overall salary. Players get money from some other fees on the sides of things. And there's also money that is sometimes paid to players outside the salary cap as well. But this site here has tracked these auction price quite nicely for us. The first 6 years are basically a bonus for Delhi, Mumbai, Deccan Chargers, and then the Sunrisers, who he moved to when Deccan folded. It's kind of interesting that in the first 6 years of the IPL, he had 4 different teams, and none of them were really paying him that much. He wasn't much more than just a productive local player at this point. But that's when you look at his overall stats. In 2012 and 2013, he was way better than that. 2012 is really the first year that he had a breakout in the IPL, averaging over 40 and striking at more than 130. The next year he slowed down a little bit, but he still scored a lot of runs. They were his best 2 years at that point by a distance. And as should be the way in sport, after an early small contract, he eventually got a big deal when he started to make the runs. He was on a really good contract for 2014. And straight after getting that contract, he was pretty poor. I've taken off 2009 here because he only played 5 games. So his worst proper season was 2010. And his seasons in 2014 and 2015 weren't bad for like a normal player. But he was already established at this stage and on a very big contract. He was not worth that contract at all. He was about to turn 30 on a big deal and he wasn't scoring as many runs as normal and he was doing it far slower. The next 3 years he bounced back. This was the glory time for the Sunrisers and he started averaging around 38 every year and not scoring that fast, but the team was winning and he was doing fine. But he never broke a strike rate of 130 in any of these years. They were good consistent runs, but not earth-shattering, and probably not worth more than 10 crore, like the deal he was on. With the mega auction for 2018, the Sunrisers didn't retain him, but they used their right to match, and they let the market dictate what he was worth, which was 5.2 crores, less than half of what he was on before. I'm not sure that was wrong looking at these numbers though. His last 2 years just hadn't been that good and he was now in his 30s. The first 2 years of his contract he was actually really poor. He was lucky to get the same contract again. And the last 2 he was good, but not worth this much money. He clearly disagreed with what he was being paid and it seemed to change the way he batted in 2018. That was a year the Sunrisers made the final, and also after that season he asked for a trade. I actually recorded this episode last week. And at that stage, all the stats were saying that this was going to be one of Shikhar Dhawan's best seasons again. He has actually regressed a little bit, but I just wanted to explain exactly what had happened here. He's basically come back from resumption and like a lot of players, really struggled with playing in the UAE. In India, he was amazing. And in the UAE, not so much. So his average and strike rate have dropped massively, meaning that overall, it looks like a more normal season with a higher average rather than the more super attacking years he's had in the years gone by. Now this is where it gets fun. The Sunrisers decided to trade him to Delhi. The three players they got were Abhishek Sharma, who was young and cheap, Vijay Shankar, who had gone for a surprising amount the year before, and Shahbaz Nadeem, who was on about the same as Shankar. Their aggregate cost was around 7 crore. Dhawan was on 5.2 crore. And the story at the time was that he was looking to get around 7. So if all these numbers are true, and again, they're just auction numbers and based on speculation in some cases, there's something quite interesting about them. The Sunrisers stated officially that they couldn't pay Dhawan any more money, but they did actually take on more money by taking on this trade. They went to around 7 crore. I'm not quite sure exactly what the regulations were at this point, but Delhi managed to pay him more, quite clearly, otherwise he wouldn't have left the Sunrisers. So Delhi paid him above his auction price. So we can only assume that he's no longer on this amount of money. There's a significant jump in lifestyle when you go from a small amount of money to a big amount of money. To be able to go back to that when you're still what you think in your prime cricket career must be quite weird. That would have spurred Dhawan on. You could see why he had a good year in 2018 and also why he wanted more money. He was worth more than the 5.2, even if the market had dictated, probably correctly, that that's where he was heading. But all this contract stuff is also really interesting here. He gets good in 2012 and 13, gets the big payday, and instantly slows down. He then slightly improves when they give him that money again, but it's quite clear on the open market he's no longer worth that much. And so the market cuts his wage. And then he does two things. He has a great year, and then he demands a trade and a raise, and then he continues to perform at his best with the assumption that he'll finally get back to this level. So his next auction price will be very interesting. He'll be 36 for the next IPL season, but he'll be coming off the back of probably his best 4 years of his career. Even if he's had a bit of a slip in strike rate this year, it's still quite clearly one of his best. But I think there's even more interesting things about Dhawan here. I wonder if the original overpayment that he was given was partly because he's such an outstanding ODI player and has been for a very long time. Like he's been a top run scorer in the IPL, but not all the best players are always available for that. And there's obviously a limit on overseas players. But he's also the 5th highest run scorer worldwide since he made his ODI debut. His record really is excellent. He's averaging mid-40s and striking at over 90 for a decade. He's certainly one of the world's best one-day international players. And it's not just ODIs, is it? He has proven himself to be a quality test player as well, averaging over 40 with 700s. Googlies, quarter seamer, carom, dukes, back of the hand, red, leg cutters, teesra, pink, knuckle, white, slider, seed, heavy, bounces, cherry, length, pill, off cutters, old, crimson traveller, kookaburra, hard, outswing, second new, off spin, arm, SG, split finger, shiny, leg spin, soft, new, yorkers, flippers, wrong-uns, long hops, reverse swing, half volley, and third new. These are just some of the names we use for balls in cricket. Well, Manscaped wants you to be as proud of your balls as you are of the ones delivered by your favourite cricketer. Manscaped just launched their 4th generation trimmer, the Lawnmower 4.0. Join over 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer, 20% off and free worldwide shipping. Insert the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. I've actually used this, not just something that I'm hawking for fun, and I got to admit, I thought it was a bit silly, and then I went down there, and it was exceptional. I honestly feel I could bowl outswing with one nut and inswing with the other. So get 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code REDINKA at manscaped.com. Manscaped, for the man who cares about his balls as much as the ones out in the middle. He didn't have a great test career, but he was certainly very good, and one of those hundreds was pretty handy and pretty fast. And I think there's a bit of a memory here. We've seen him dominate so much in ODI cricket, and we've seen some incredible innings from him in test matches. I think some people think that Dhawan is a faster scorer than he is, because he's very quick for an ODI player with his amount of runs. And for test cricket, in the period he played, he was the 5th quickest scorer of the top run makers. I think we all have images of him scoring a lot of runs and usually doing it pretty quickly. And you can see quite easily just that he has high strike rates. But when you put him in the IPL company, his strike rate is not high. It's quite low. He's at his most attacking in tests, and he pulls it back a little bit for ODIs, but he's actually on the slower side for T20. This does happen to players. In fact, let me tell you about Michael Slater. In the 90s, Slater came into the Australia team driving at everything. He would throw himself at the first few overs of a test match, trying to disrupt the bowlers, often before settling down into a less manic style later on. His test strike rate was only 53, but it was very quick for that era. You could see Mike Atherton and Grant Flower all the way down here, and this bloke Sanif Jayasuriya is up the top, and Slater is on the upper end of this. And so based on this, Australia decided to give him a go in ODI cricket. But weirdly, Slater had always been terrible in List A cricket for New South Wales. He didn't do that much better when he played it for Derby either. And when he played for Australia, he also didn't make that many runs, and he was quite slow. They are very different formats. In a test match, Slater would slash and drive hard with 3 slips and a gully and gaps all over the offside. In an ODI, fielders were in the ring, and there was a third man, and everyone was back. And in a test match, he could slow down when he needed to. And it's worth noting that when you look at Michael Slater as an ODI player, he's no longer anywhere near Sanif Jayasuriya up the top. He's now all the way down the bottom. In fact, he's on the same rung as Grant Flower and Michael Atherton, except for the fact that they actually made more runs than him. Limited overs cricket doesn't suit every kind of attacking red ball player. Dhawan is different, but I think there's similar patterns here. He clearly likes the freedom of test matches. But he also likes the manipulation of fields in one-day internationals, which Slater did not. But in T20, the strike rotation seems to get him stuck. And so he doesn't attack the way he quite often can in test matches. And he rotates the strike a bit more like he does in ODIs, with a slightly higher rate. But in the end, for the longest part of his career, he's just not quite made the most of both of those skills. But he has now, because I showed you at the start, and because you're probably sitting here going, wait a minute, he seems to score pretty well these days. And that is absolute fact. But I just wanted to know how things had changed. The first thing I found was that he had the exact same average against spin now than he did before. The real jump in his average comes from pace. This is a big step up, and it's why he's making more runs. The weird thing about this is that he's put on more runs against pace, but also upped his strike rate at the same time. But the jump I'm really interested in isn't against pace. I'm impressed by that, but I can't help but noticing he's scoring at 1.2 runs and over quicker against spin now. And so I looked into different kinds of spinners. And he's been much better when it spins away and when it spins in. And much better against finger spin, and also has improved against wrist spin. He's just scoring quicker against spin now. And at this stage I got a little bit obsessed. So I started checking seam bowling as well. And you can see he's got even better against left arm seamers than he has against right. But he's still smashing right arm seamers more than he used to. In the left arm data, he was struggling a little bit before, only averaging 25, and now it's 54. But he does face less of that, so it's harder to know if he's fixed something or just had some luck. But to recap, he's scored more runs and quicker against pretty much every kind of bowling since 2018. And I'm going to use a word that is big on cricket Twitter these days: intent. I hate using it, and quite often it's thrown around because people don't really want to discuss techniques or different changes in players. But I don't think he's changed that much in his technique. It isn't that he's gone to more favourable pitches, because a lot of the recent IPL's been played, well, everywhere. And he hasn't suddenly started learning to reverse sweep or anything dramatic like that. It's just against every single mode of bowling, Shikhar Dhawan is just more attacking now. That he's done it while making even more runs is just remarkable. But why he didn't try it earlier will always be the big mystery, and it's probably the difference between here and here. There have been 2 Shikhar Dhawans, one that made good runs and rotated the strike, and then the more modern one, which has been outstanding now for almost 4 years.